Venus and star blessings. How are you doing, everybody? Just an audio for today, as it is extremely hot here for us in the southern hemisphere. 2 days in a row of about 35 degrees. So, yeah, winter for you guys. So I always think about that when I think about you guys, because most of the people here who listen and watch my videos are pretty much from the northern hemisphere. So we're always in very different seasons. So here we are leaving behind the Scorpio season, which is always an interesting chapter, isn't it, in the year? It's the water element, it takes us into the soul territory, into the unconscious, into the underworld, and towards our personal limitations, and helps us metamorphosize, transform, and evolve pretty much every year. So here we are now in the Sagittarius season, just to use a popular catchphrase. And what I noticed about this particular Sag cycle, let me just bring up the chart so we can have a little look-see together. Obviously, we need to consider the ruler of Sagittarius, which is Jupiter, right? And Jupiter, of course, is retrograde in Gemini. So the sun will swing around, as it progresses through Sagittarius, and it will form an opposition to Jupiter. Mercury stations retrograde in a few days' time on the 22nd, well, tomorrow, is it? I think it's tomorrow, on the 22nd degree of Sagittarius, conjunct Pallas Athena opposite Jupiter. I've already spoken to that. That's the most recent video that I uploaded. So I won't unpack Mercury again, but I want to talk about the new moon that's coming up in Sagittarius, because the ruler is Jupiter. And I think the overall essence of this new moon is going to be the fact that Jupiter and Saturn will be aspecting this new moon, and they will basically create what's called a T-square. And that's a very important aspect pattern. And secondly, the Jupiter and Saturn energy, well, first of all, that starts from 2020, when we had they call it the Great Conjunction, Jupiter and Saturn conjunct in Aquarius, right? Back in 2020. And so this is the first quarter square, basically. And the first square occurred in August of this year, of 2024. And the second part of this phase will occur early December, I think, just on the new moon, actually. Let me just see. I've got the new moon chart here. So there's the new moon chart, there's the new moon, and where are we? No, so it happens a few days into December. Actually, hang on. Yeah, 24th of December, Jupiter and Saturn come to their second exactness, of this square aspect. So this basically, this Sagittarian season involves its ruler Jupiter, which is retrograde in Gemini, meaning it's in detriment, and it is also squaring Saturn. So Jupiter, being the dispositor of this new moon, the ruler of Sagittarius, it's in a bit of trouble because it's in Gemini. But let me just say this, that in certain traditions, as in medieval astrology, for example, when a planet is in detriment, it is said that a planet in detriment, or fall for that matter, they're quite similar, but there are some distinctions between the two. But basically, a planet in detriment or fall operates outside of the establishment. It operates outside the consensus. So a planet's in exaltation or rulership they tend to be more operating in the consensus and the status quo or the establishment. Thus, why they tend to be a lot more successful as well, because they don't have the resistance, right, from the majority. That's the key point here. Whereas when a planet is in detriment, it's pushing up against the establishment, right? So it's trying to achieve something with a support that would be a minority versus the majority. Thus, the challenges when a planet is in its detriment. So Jupiter is in detriment. It is opposite this new moon. It is square Saturn, and the exactness of the square happens towards the end of December. So let's just rewind and go back to Sagittarius being, the energy for the next 4 weeks, which is always it's always a pretty uplifting type of energy, right? Because when you're coming out of the swamps, the 8th house Scorpio, the underworld, the soul world, the feeling world, the realm of, deep feelings, deep fears, all that sort of stuff. It is quite refreshing to come out of that into Sagittarius, 9th house Jupiter energy, which is what we are talking about. That takes us towards, unlimited horizons, as it were, the expanded sort of view, perspective, understanding, and just an overall feeling of a greater sense of optimism, right? Greater sense of confidence. That's all related to Sagittarius. And also humor as well, which I think is really important. In fact, humor is probably, it's in my top 5 of qualities that I really appreciate in a person, because of the intensity of this life at different times. It's not intense all the time. And because of the complexity and depth of our soul's evolutionary journey, if we didn't have humor and if we couldn't laugh at ourselves at different times, we just, it's such a suffocating place to be in. You end up just being all sort of tightly wound up, right? You can't relax and you can't laugh at things, and sometimes things are just pretty fucking funny, and thank God for that. So, I like Sag for that reason as well, quite apart from it being, the archetype that corresponds to truth, wisdom, the teacher, the guru, our cosmological orientation, natural law. Sagittarius is great, really. It really, really is. It's a very inspiring type of energy, and it's a fire sign. All 3 fire signs have an element of inspiration about them. That is Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius, right? Because inspiration comes from the word in spirit, and the fire signs are spirit. That's what they are. They're spirit energy. So they induce this sense of inspiration. As I said, all 3 of them in different ways. And of course, with Sagittarius, the inspiration that comes through is typically through something that we learn, that opens our mind and expands our understanding, takes us out of that limited, narrow sort of perspective or view or understanding of life, or of your own life, and so forth. And of course, I just want to back up actually, because there's something quite interesting. In the Scorpio season, which we've only just really finished, it's very interesting to me, and it's never coincidental. It's just as above, so below. Demi Moore made a movie during this time, the Scorpio season. Well, that's when it was released anyway. And she is a Scorpio, and she's a Scorpio Venus star point as well. In fact, she's got what Ariel Gutman calls the triple crown, meaning she was born with a Sun Venus conjunction, and so therefore her natal Venus is there, in Scorpio conjunct the sun, and her Venus star point is that as well. So that's kind of like called the Triple Crown. It's a very, very strong position to be born under, and not everyone gets born, with a Sun Venus conjunction, whether it's a morning star or an evening star. In her case, I believe it was a morning star. Anyway, the movie is called The Substance. And I watched the movie because I really like Demi Moore. I think she's a, fantastic artist, fantastic actress. Um, and you can just see the Scorpio intensity uh, in her craft, in her work. And she's also I think she's got Neptune there as well. Neptune is there as well. So she's got that glamorous side to her, which is the Neptune, and then she's got that really intense scorpionic side as well. So she draws you in, basically, right? Now some people might not like her, and that's fine. I'm not here to discuss or ask questions about who likes her, who doesn't. The point I'm trying to make is that the movie she made was a very, very powerful intense movie, quite gory, very dark, and is not easy to watch. I'm going to be honest. It was very difficult to watch, especially the last 30 minutes of it was just quite pretty dark and pretty gory. So anyway, I watched the movie, I was looking at her chart while I was doing that. And sorry to sidetrack for those of you who are just interested in the new moon, but this is good learning material. So if you can be patient, I'll get back to the new moon in a moment. Um, Watched the movie, looked at her chart, so on and so forth, and then looked at the current transits to her chart, because that's how you learn astrology. You observe and you correlate. That's simply how you learn. You observe the sky whenever you can, observe the sky, and then observe this reality. You draw the correlation in that way. That's how you learn what every symbol represents. Long story short, she's got Saturn and her south node in Aquarius at 0 and 1 degrees. So transiting Pluto is right there, conjunct that Saturn south node in Aquarius, right? And that corresponds to the movie, the release of that movie, her role in that movie, what that movie was about, and so on and so forth. That's one side of it. There was a few other things going on as well. But what I'm trying to get to with bringing this up to begin with is that when I posted that on my astrology Facebook page, there were several people that came on who just were extremely critical, judgmental, and more or less just projecting their own unresolved darkness, in my opinion. Because it's one thing to identify and recognize certain things in life, whether that's observing a person, a situation, a movie, or whatever it is. It's one thing to observe and identify certain things, right, and have an objective perspective on it. And it's another thing to observe something and be completely subjective in your perspective. And that is easily distinguished and defined when you listen to what people say, for instance. So anyway, there was a lot of bashing of this movie and of Demi Moore, and calling her, a Satanist, and she's involved in the Hollywood satanic, thing. And some person brought up her past, where when she was 19, she had some romance with a minor who was, I think, 14 or 15 years of age, and just basically slagging her, right? Like really just trying to pull her apart. Demi Moore, that is. That is the person who was making their comments and so forth. And so, I looked at what this person was saying, and then a couple of other people jumped on, they got on the wagon, so to speak, and, joined in the bashing episode. And of course, I nowadays I don't bother engaging in that sort of dialogue or responding or trying to debate or trying to bring in a more objective view, because I found through the years that it's basically a waste of my fucking time. And as it is, social media drains enough of our energy as it is. And I just see that as futile. So basically, I just deleted their comments and I ended up blocking a few of them from my page, to be honest, because I just don't want that kind of energy around me. It's not, it's also much that I don't appreciate other people's perspectives, because I certainly do, but I can tell the difference of when somebody can be very objective in a dialogue, in a perspective and a conversation or questions or thoughts or whatever, versus just being really caught up in their own unresolved darkness and just projecting it and, you know, just throwing the stones, you know. And I just want to read something to you guys just very quickly. So as I was reflecting on these things, I just wrote something like, everyone needs to integrate their darkness, stop projecting it all externally and being self-righteous in casting stones. And that's not a quote that I picked up from somewhere and regurgitated. That was just my thought in that moment. And it's not a revelational thought. I'm sure most of you have had that kind of thought at some point, you know, yourselves. This is all relative to Scorpio territory, which is what we've just come out of, right? And it's, you know, with moving into Sagittarius, of course, Sagittarius, you know, at a perhaps you could say perhaps its shadow side, slash personality side, Sagittarius can be very self-righteous, right? And my favorite quote, of course, is every saint has a past and every sinner has a future. You know, I love that quote so much. It's probably my absolute favorite quote. Yeah, or top five. Simply because when I remember that quote and I'm inclined to make a judgment on someone's actions and behavior, I just remember that quote whenever I can. And it sort of it just pulls me up, you know, and it just reminds me, hey, hang on a minute. You don't know what that person's story or circumstances are, you know, so who are you to judge it, right? So moving into Sagittarius, you know, we're going to see, as we always do, pretty much every Sag season, a lot of self-righteous type of perspectives and beliefs and attitudes, you know, and that's something that's just part and parcel with Sagittarius, of course, you know. And of course, because Sagittarius really ultimately it you know, it loves truth and it's seeking the truth and it wishes to communicate that and to share that, right? So some people who are so sort of overtaken by that, you know, they will attempt to convert people, you know, in towards their own philosophical orientation, their own beliefs, because when they can convert people, they feel a greater sense of security, right, and safety, and feel that, well, I must be right given I was able to convert this person to believe what I believe. You know, that's part of Sagittarius, and that's where we've got to watch these nets where we can get hooked into stuff, or we've got to watch just our own tone, our own intention, and our own doing, right, in this sense. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what anybody believes, but what do you believe? And what is that belief based on? And then we'd take it even further, reach into Pisces, for example, where the ultimate truth is really Neptune, Pisces, 12th house, the ultimate totality, oneness, truth of everything, right? But before we get to Pisces, there's Aquarius, and this is where Pluto is right now, right? And Aquarius is the sign that the keynote for Aquarius is I know. And I've mentioned this just recently, and the knowing, you know, with Aquarius is it's not an intellectual one. It's a very deep sense of knowing something that you don't know it because somebody taught it to you or because you read it somewhere, um, or you studied something. It's a knowing that comes from within. I want to say probably the soul. You know, it's a deep wisdom and knowing from within. So if we really know something to that level, to that depth. We don't really need to try and convert everybody else. We don't need to, have the validation by everybody around us that, yes, what we believe or what we think is correct, because we know. And when you know, you know. It's as simple as that. So, Sagittarius just, yeah, it does kind of highlight a lot of these sorts of themes, if you like. Okay, so um, getting back to, oh, sorry, just one final point about the movie with Demi Moore. The reason I said that Pluto conjunct her South Node and Saturn speaks to the theme of that movie is because, for those of you that don't know, the movie is basically based on it's probably one of the darkest and trippiest films I've seen, and she's extraordinary in terms of it's just mind-boggling, what her character, what she did in this movie, the metamorphosis, and just it's just full on. But basically, in a nutshell, the story is about her being 50 years of age. Um, she was a very famous, in the movie, that is, a very famous aerobics instructor. So, health, fitness representative, whatever. And she was hot and, whatever, right? Which she still is, I suppose. But because she turned 50, they basically sacked her, right? Because 50 is considered in society as, it's all over for you. When you're a female, that was the point. When you are a woman, there's this consensus perspective that alludes to, women over 50, it's all over for them. They can't be sexy anymore. They can't be sensual. They can't pull it off like they used to back in the day, and blah blah blah, right? It's very pretentious on that level, but at a deep psychological and spiritual level, it has different undertones to it. So the movie was about her aging and being fired, and she somehow connects with some organization where she can I don't want to give it away, so I don't want to say too much, but basically she takes something that enables her to become 20 years of age again. And so she lives these two lives where she's 20 years of age one week, and then the next week she's back at 50 again. And she's always got to revert back to being 50, or some pretty twisted, dark things will happen to her if she doesn't. So the story is based on all of that. And so Saturn, of course, corresponds to chronological age, right? And so there was Pluto on her Saturn. And I think she's got Mars in Leo. Mars in Leo opposite Saturn and the South Node. Yes, in her fifth house. So it brought up it just highlighted those themes in her chart very, very strongly. And of course, the Sun Neptune energy and the Venus and all of that was just so fascinating to me. Okay, so getting back to the new moon. Opposite Jupiter square Saturn, T square. As I was saying before, when a planet is in detriment, it is said through certain teachings that that planet that is in detriment will try to achieve great things, as it were, but it will experience resistance and obstacles because it will operate outside of the consensus. So it just won't get the support that it would normally get. So if Jupiter was in Sag, it would just, it's the sort of optimum position, right? Which is the opposite sign, of course. So why is that important here? Well, it's important because it is opposite the new moon, and Saturn is wedged in between Jupiter and the new moon. So whatever this new moon brings, and whatever intentions we have with it, we must consider the opposition to Jupiter and then the square that Saturn brings to this story as well. So first of all, if we are trying to, or actually, whatever we are trying to achieve at this time, from a Jupiter Sagittarius level, we need to keep in mind that Jupiter is retrograde, which is, I love retrograde planets, absolutely love them. I've got so many of them retrograde in my chart. Retrograde planets, they too operate outside of the consensus reality, outside the norm. It's much deeper than that, much more complex, but just at least know that one point. Of course, there are those other elements to planets retrograde, which is where, things can chop and change, or it's more challenging to proceed forward. You have to kind of stop and reflect. And yes, of course, there is all of that. But what it really does at the deepest level is it takes you inside, in this case, Jupiter, to the deepest wisdom within you. So you're not looking for the wisdom outside of you because it's already within you, right? So, but Jupiter is in Gemini, so it's in detriment, as I said. For that reason, there's something about this Jupiter where we may be trying to put something out there, or push something out there, or create something out there, as it were, that, that we may feel that it's not happening. It's not being supported as we thought it would be. It's not being seen or acknowledged as we thought it would be. We're not getting enough of the spotlight on it, and so forth. And if that is something that you've been going through, just know that that's one of the features of a planet in detriment. And what would be the ultimate takeaway out of that? Well, don't give up. Just, keep going. If it's something that, is really in alignment with what you fundamentally feel really connected to, authentic about, and it's from your soul, why would you give up? Doesn't matter if you're getting this external resistance, because that won't be forever, right? Jupiter is not going to be in Gemini forever. So, that's just something to keep in mind. And the next layer to this then is the Saturn being square here. So because it's a T-square, what happens with a T-square is there is obviously planets in opposition to each other, in this case, the new moon and Jupiter. Jupiter, of course, is a dispositor of the new moon, and we know Jupiter is not in the best shape because it's in detriment, but we must continue to have faith from the inner wells of wisdom versus trying to get it out there, right? So we must continue to have faith and not give up. Okay. Fire signs actually don't give up anyway. And the other element I think that's important to bring up with Sagittarius, of course, and the new moon in Sag, is the element of freedom, just simply freedom in your expression, in your life, in whatever you are doing. Sagittarius is an archetype that corresponds to freedom, period. So Saturn at the apex is a key point here, because that new moon and that Jupiter opposite the moon, it's got to work through that Saturn, to put it very, very, very simply, the energy of the new moon and Jupiter, it's going to get funneled through that Saturn being at the apex point of this T-square. And what does that mean? Well, what does Saturn mean? For those of you that don't know what Saturn corresponds to, it corresponds to time, discipline, patience, planning, maturity, limitations. Those are probably some of the best key words. So how do we translate that into this T-square? My guess is that whatever we try to achieve with this new moon cycle, although we may feel a great sense of optimism and confidence in certain pathways, we will have to consider the message of Saturn, and also the message of Saturn square Jupiter, which, although it doesn't perfect until later in the month, it's still within range there. And of course, Saturn Jupiter energy is, very simply put, one is contraction, which is Saturn, and the other one is expansion, which is Jupiter. And so we have this, because they are in square to one another, that is, the distance between them creates what's called a square, which is around about 90 degrees. And usually with square aspects, which is a very dynamic aspect, so much can be achieved through square aspects, actually, because they make things, they appear to make things fairly uncomfortable, in some cases extremely uncomfortable, which causes us to take action because it's just so uncomfortable to stay with how things are. So we take action, and we change our mind. We make a new decision, right, to create something new. That's the advantage of squares. But of course, the other side to that is that the resistance and the squeezing and pushing of two energies trying to occupy the same space. And on the one hand, there can be this sense of, the Jupiter component. I've got these goals, these dreams, these visions of what I'm trying to expand towards, and I'm not getting the acknowledgement or support that I really hoped for, Jupiter in detriment. And I'm also faced with these obstacles and limitations, Saturn. That's the difficult side to this particular pattern of energies. But how do you work through this? How do you resolve this energy or this conflict or this dynamic? And the conflict here is more associated to external conflicts. I say this because the Jupiter-Saturn is a first quarter square, and the first quarter square is crisis in action. That was coined by Dane Rudhyar many, many moons ago. So the energy of a first quarter square speaks to, you're trying to do things out there in the world, and you're coming up against a lot of conflict or resistance or just things or people getting in your way, not in feeling like you're being sort of blocked, as it were, right? So the key ultimately really is Saturn. And Saturn in this picture is direct, as it recently went direct. So that's kind of favorable in this picture, because Saturn's direct motion is indicative of us being able to proceed forward with whatever Saturn is corresponding to in our life at the moment. So a lot of this new moon story then comes down to where is transiting Saturn in your birth chart, of course, and therefore where is the new moon, where is Uranus. It's always really important to look at it from the perspective of your own birth chart, right? Because the houses, that the position of where these planets are, is the field in which these dynamics will be highlighted. It's as simple as that. So the ultimate key with Saturn is patience, and not only patience, but the wisdom of patience. That's what Saturn, as the apex planet in a T-square, fundamentally alludes to. It's trying to, it sort of forces a situation, or an individual, to really learn about the wisdom of patience, proper planning, timing, and the maturity and discipline that is involved in what you are trying to cultivate, right? Versus just being erratic, impulsive. Not that those things are bad. There's nothing bad or good inherently. But it's, for example, if it was Uranus there, obviously, it would be a flip side to this coin, wouldn't it? It would be all about freedom, liberation, yes, being impulsive, taking risks, doing things that, outside of the norm, so on and so forth, right? But Uranus is not there. That's the point. It's Saturn that's there. So we must pay respect to Saturn's position in this picture, because that's the energy that is there. We can't just bypass it and just ignore it or deny it. Saturn is, it's such a powerful energy, especially in this 3D reality. So the best way to work with Saturn is to truly, truly, truly integrate it and not project it all around you. That's the best way to work with Saturn. And Saturn is the master teacher. And again, I've said this before, Saturn at a more esoteric level is it's a very different type of vibration and energy to the way we normally relate to Saturn and experience Saturn, which is based on time and our responsibilities and duties and work commitments or commitment in general, all that sort of stuff. But at a much higher level, Saturn is the gatekeeper to these transpersonal, transcendent spheres which do exist. And so, it's a little bit like Saturn would rule doors, walls, corners, all things that create a closure of some kind or a limitation or a barrier, right? And it's kind of like saying, well, Saturn will hold that door closed until you are ready to take that responsibility that you need in order to open the door to get to Uranus. So in a T-square pattern with a new moon energy, whatever we are trying to accomplish over the next 4 weeks, yes, there's the backstory of feeling a greater sense of optimism and inspiration and confidence to proceed forward, feeling happier, maybe feeling a bit lighter as well, or much lighter actually, relative to just coming out of Scorpio season. But we must acknowledge Saturn's presence here. And it's simply saying that whatever you are planning to do, just understand that you need to implement patience, proper timing, proper planning, and the discipline required for it. Because if you try to bypass that, it's just simply not going to work out. That's, in a nutshell, what's going on there. And yeah, and also, as I said before, the square between Saturn and Jupiter, which occurs a couple of weeks after the new moon, it's still within play here. So we are still in that zone, that energy of perhaps wanting to move ahead, but finding some blocks or some limitations. It could even be, if it's not physical sort of blocks or limitations, it might just be internal psychological blocks, resistances, fears, incompetencies, not feeling good enough, not feeling smart enough, not feeling whatever enough, which can be a downside to Saturn. When we feel like Saturn is beating us up, so to speak, unfortunately, that negative sort of shadow side to Saturn can be, tremendous inhibitions and fear and lack of confidence to pursue our dreams, our goals, our aspirations, to take risks, because risk taking, of course, is Jupiter, Uranus, would be Mars as well. And Saturn is just that cautious energy, that limited energy, that restrictive energy, but only it's felt in extreme ways in terms of its limits and so forth when we are not owning that energy, very simply put. So that's the key. That's ultimately the key here. I think I will wrap it up there for today because it is extremely hot here. And yeah, I'll see you guys soon. If you've stayed all the way to the end, thank you. And just a reminder, I've got a third course coming up, which is all advanced material. So if you really want to learn advanced astrology, such as phases, aspects, the nodes through the houses, planets through the houses themselves, the different layers of the houses, just all eclipses, and quite a few more other subjects as well. That's what my third course is going to be about. So really the art of synthesis of putting it all together, right? And integrating it and seeing how much you really understand, about a chart when you're looking at it. How are you able to synthesize everything and bring it together? I mean, it's one thing to know, okay, Jupiter is in Gemini and it's in this chart and it's in the second house. Great, that's your basis, right? You have to identify that first. But then you have to identify, okay, Jupiter in the second house. Okay, it's retrograde. Okay, it's square Saturn. Okay, what else is it doing? It's trine Vesta. It's sextile Chiron. It's doing a lot of other things, for instance, and there'd be all these midpoint structures going on as well, which will be a class that I'll be teaching as well, midpoints, which is extremely important, even to the point of transiting midpoints, believe it or not, can kick off some major, major things in your life. And I have the proof for that, having observed that in my own life, for instance, and in other people's lives. So anyway, there's a lot there. If you're interested in any of that, shoot me an email. I've decided to not begin that until the new year because we're at, such a close time towards the end of the year at the moment. People are crazy busy. People travel, and Sagittarius is, the energy for the next 4 weeks. A lot of people will be traveling and so forth. And yeah, so we won't start until the new year sometime. So just shoot me an email if you want to know more about that. And what else was I going to say? There was one more thing and I've just forgotten. Never mind. I will see you guys probably soon. I'd like to do at least one more video before Christmas, before the new year. So I'll see you guys very soon. Hope this was useful and interesting. As always, leave your comments or questions below and reach out if you'd like to connect with me for a reading or classes or whatever it may be. Sending you all so much love for this new moon. Beautiful Saggy energy, but don't forget Saturn is the master teacher and it's wedged right in there, saying you can't shoot those arrows as far as you want to and achieve everything you want to if you don't align with the master teacher. See you soon, guys. Bye for now.